the drive. Tatum the finish. It is banner 18. The mission demanding is mission accomplished.
What's up, everyone? This is Noa Dalzell, and I'm here with a breaking news version of You Got Boston. I wasn't expecting any moves to happen today. It just feels like a very slow week in August. But that's usually, I've learned in this job, right when you're least expecting it is when things happen. And we see the Celtics trade Georges Niang and 2 second-round picks to Utah in exchange for Utah rookie who is currently on a two-way deal, RJ Lewis Jr. And then about 10 minutes after that, Shams Charania reports that the Celtics have signed forward Chris Boucher to a one-year, $3.3 million contract. And so right away, you've shed nearly $5 million in salary off your payroll because Niang was on an expiring $8.2 million deal. And then also you have a brand new addition in your young group of players, RJ Lewis Jr. And so I don't know if they're going to keep RJ. He is on a two-way contract after going undrafted, signed with Utah. If they do keep him, he is currently their third two-way player alongside Miles Norris and Max Shulga, who signed last week. My understanding is that Amari Williams is still they're still thinking that he's going to play out, sign a two-way. So I don't think this moves changes that necessarily, but it's just another guy that's going to compete for a two-way spot, potentially a roster spot. Will probably be a training camp. But there's a lot to discuss here. I'm going to talk a little bit about why they made this move. The Niang move is a salary dump. It's very clear that they wanted to continue offloading salary. And we'll talk a little bit about what they get with Chris Boucher, who I think is a sneaky, really good signing. $3.3 million, one-year deal. So you're not committing to anything in the long term. But they do need additional front court help, and he gives them that. He averaged 10 points last year in Toronto. He has shot pretty good from the outside. He was 36% from three last season. And so he's just another guy now that's going to be in the mix alongside Neemias Queta, alongside Luka Garza. There's one more guy that's going to be battling for front court minutes. And they needed it. They really needed an additional person because just from a health standpoint, you don't know who's going to necessarily be available. And you need some insurance. And I don't know if you all saw, but Peyton Pritchard had an interview with NBC Sports Boston yesterday and said, we're competing for a championship. We're competing for playoffs. Obviously, that's not very likely that they're going to be a championship. Nobody's going to be betting on the Celtics, or at least most people won't. But I think that this is one of those things where they are filling out the roster to just be a little bit more playable because you do need more front court support. So I'm going to talk a little bit about these moves. Feel free to put questions in the chat as we go here. I want to be able to kind of further contextualize everything, and at the same time, we want to understand that at the same, we're still in the middle of things, so more moves are potentially coming, and we're really kind of in the thick of kind of the salary shedding era of the Celtics team. So just wanted to start at the top. Georges Niang was acquired in the trade that the Celtics, offloaded Kristaps Porzingis' contract. That was a really good cost-cutting deal from the Celtics standpoint because Porzingis had about $30 million on his contract, and then Niang was making $8.2 million and was also on an expiring. Niang, I would say, received one of the least hospitable Celtics welcomes that I have ever seen from fans online. Like, nobody wanted him in Boston. A lot of it, I think, could be traced back to the incident with Jaylen Brown a couple years back where he grabbed his leg. Game 7 in 2023 conference finals, he was on the 76ers. Niang is not a bad player. I will maintain that. I've defended him. At the same time, he had no media availability. At the same game that we spoke with Luka Garza and Josh Minot, this was a summer league game, Niang was with them and he was not made available to the media. So I had a hunch that Niang was potentially not going to be around long, into next season, but he's a good three-point shooter. He's a reliable player. He's been a part of a lot of winning teams. So as much as fans, I think, we're excited to see him get traded today, he's not a bad player. They also get rid of 2 second-round picks, which we don't know which picks these are yet. I don't think that's been reported. But if you'll remember, the Celtics acquired additional picks this year, right? They got 2 additional second-round picks this draft. When they moved down from 32 and got 46 and 57. So I'm sure a lot of you guys were probably with us that night, but the Celtics had the 32nd pick in the second round of the draft, and then they traded that for the 46th pick, which became Amari Williams, and the 57th pick, which became Max Shulga, and they also got additional picks. So they have a a lot of these picks, they really wanted to offload salary, and they're able to offload $5 million with these set of transactions. Niang's replacement was not a mystery for very long because, like I said, about 10 minutes later, Chris Boucher signs a $3.3 million deal. So he's probably a player that, gives him a little bit more size, not as an elite, not as elite of a shooter, but does give them an opportunity to have another big that's kind of in that front court mix. And at the same time, he's on a much more affordable deal than the $8.2 million. So that's really the swap of today. No more Niang. We get Chris Boucher in. He's had a long career with the Raptors. He's 32 years old. And a fun fact, I don't know if you guys are aware, but he actually is formerly teammates with Peyton Pritchard in Oregon. They played together for one season. Pritchard was a freshman. Boucher was a senior, and they've been competitors since. So another one of those fun college connections that we're seeing now kind of come into fruition. I said from the start, when Jrue Holiday was traded for Anthony Simons and when Kristaps Porzingis was traded for Georges Niang, neither of those players were players that, I believe the Celtics went out to try to get. I don't think that they were necessarily trying to sign Niang, trying to acquire Simons, but they were the best available deals out there. And one of these players has already been offloaded. One of those contracts has already been, moved on. That was Niang's. That's the easier one to move because he's just making $8.2 million. Simons is making $28 million. So there's fewer teams that are willing to accept that type of contract. That being said, I don't know that this means that Simons is more or less likely to get traded, because on one hand, you're able to shed a little bit of salary without getting rid of Simons. Is Simons next? I've felt from the beginning when he was acquired that it doesn't really make sense to keep him on the roster next year if you don't have any intentions of having him as part of your long-term core. But you're not going to give up assets, or at least a lot of assets, because they gave up already 2 second-round picks for this Niang move, right? So they're not going to give up 3 second-round picks and 2, and you don't want to get rid of your entire draft capital to get rid of these contracts. So I don't know if they found any suitors for Simons, and we've talked about this on multiple episodes, but that archetype of player, like the high-scoring guard that's not a great defender, that's not uber efficient, it's not been a very successful trade ship this past year or so. It just hasn't been. So when they first got him, I was like, okay, they can definitely get some good stuff back for him. He's a talented scorer. He can score at all 3 levels. He can shoot the ball. He's had massive games in the NBA. He's still pretty young. But then you see guys like Colin Sexton get moved for a little value. Malik Monk doesn't seem to have a lot of value. Like, these are good players. And so I think just the league kind of recalibrated, and those kinds of players just don't have nearly as much value as they once did. And maybe that's just a temporary thing. Maybe it's just this offseason. Maybe that'll be kind of a sign of the future as well. So I'm leaning more towards Simons staying right now than I was a month ago. I think a month ago I was pretty confident that Simons was going to be moved on to another team, but he's still here. So I'm starting to think about writing more about him and kind of thinking more about how he could fit alongside this team. I think he'd be used as like a 6th man. I know some of you have debated back and forth around whether he would be the starter or Peyton Pritchard would be the starter. The main reason why I think Pritchard would be the starter is because he is the guy on a multi-year contract that is a part of their future long-term. And therefore, they're going to want to invest in him and see what he's able to do. So we'll see. It could go either way. He could also still be traded. I actually had an interview tomorrow morning with Georges Niang's high school coach because I was going to start writing a story about his roots in Boston. So that happened at the nick of time. As soon as I saw the trade, I actually still haven't emailed. I still haven't emailed him to tell him that we don't need to do the interview anymore, but he has probably figured it out because I did say that I'm a Celtics reporter writing a story about Georges Niang. So this stuff happens really quick, but we'll see if more moves are coming. I still think they're going to shed more salary because if you think about it, the entire thought process around this offseason has been, we're going to get below the second apron. They're going to shed some salary. And then all they've really been able to do, when JD Davison was on the roster about 2 weeks ago, they were still a second apron team. That move, cutting him moved them just below the second apron. Now they're about $6 million below the second apron with this cost-cutting move of getting rid of Niang and signing Chris Boucher, who is a veteran player who has won a championship and who has been a pretty reliable, just pulling up his stats here. He has played in 407 career games. He's 32 years old. I honestly thought he was a little bit younger than that, but has been pretty effective over the last few seasons, spent his first, spent one game with Golden State, but his entire career has been in Toronto. And I've already heard some really good things for some Raptors reporters that have reached out and said, he's just an awesome guy to cover, an awesome guy to have on your team. And he's hovered around double-digit scoring in his career. In 21, he averaged 13.6 points per game. That was the best season of his career. He's not an elite three-point shooter. He shoots, for his career, he has shot 33.9%, but he's had some good years there. Last year, 36.3% from the field. So he is somebody that you're going to respect his outside shot. And he's not one of those bigs that is not at all a threat from out there. So we'll see, how his shooting goes next year. He's 6'9", so kind of your traditional power forward size. So I like these set of moves because I think that you do want to continue to shed salary if you're going to, that was kind of the whole directive of this offseason, right? So for them to have just been below it, like it was pretty inevitable that they were going to get a little bit more separation there. I didn't think Niang made a ton of sense on this roster just because you already have Sam Hauser, who, again, is on a multi-year deal, is more of a part of your future, is a slightly better three-point shooter. Actually, probably maybe a little bit more than slightly, but Niang was a really good three-point shooter. That was a very underrated component here. And then now you have a little bit of your solution. Like I was just talking about this the other day, but Chris Boucher is now a guy that you can rely on for front court minutes, and he's not a question mark. Like Luka Garza, we don't know what he's going to look like as a big with real NBA minutes because he just hasn't had substantial minutes so far. That also means that he might have a high upside. Chris Boucher is more of a sure thing. Like he has now been in the NBA for a long time. He's played substantial minutes. He's hovered around, 17.7 minutes in his career. So it's not like this is a guy where you don't know what you're going to get. You do kind of know what you're going to get. And I think because there are so many question marks in the Celtics front court with Neemias Queta and, how is he going to look more scaled up? Now you have some insurance there. And I want to see that because even if this team's not going to contend, you don't want to see them be, Jalen's having a great year and Pritchard's having a great year and Derek White's having a great year, but they don't have a reliable player in the front court. And so that is definitely something that they wanted to resolve. And he was one of the best available options out there on the market. We'll talk a little bit more about these deals and a little bit more about what implications all of this has, as well as RJ Lewis Jr., who is now on the Celtics, an intriguing rookie player. But first, a quick message from our friends over at PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the best place to turn your sports knowledge into cash. With millions of members, PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 2,000 times your cash. Run your game all season long on PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the best way to get action on sports in more than 30 states, including California, Texas, and Georgia. PrizePicks is the best place to win cash while watching sports. Join millions of users and sign up today. On PrizePicks, you can mix and match player projections from different sports, combine your favorite basketball players with players from baseball, hockey, esports, and much more. PrizePicks invented the flex play, which means you can still cash out if your lineup isn't perfect. You can double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. Make your picks in less than 60 seconds and turn your sports takes into real money all season long on PrizePicks. Download the app today and use code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That is code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. So we now have a better sense of the Celtics roster for next season. I still think more moves could be coming, but there are more players that are on low salaries. And to me, one of the biggest things with next season, outside of the guys that you're locking down long-term, you don't want to have a ton of expiring money on the books that's just costing you a lot because you're in the luxury tax. But at the same time, these aren't necessarily guys that are going to be impacting the team moving forward. So this brings them a little bit closer to where I think that they're going to go. They still have one roster spot available because they did, waive JD Davison, and today was just a swap, Niang for Boucher. So it didn't change the number of guys under contract. It does, as I said, lower their payroll. It does give them a little bit more size. And I think that Boucher's skill set is a little bit less duplicative to what they already have on the roster. Niang is, was going to play a pretty similar role to a Sam Hauser type. Baylor Shireman, I think, is going to be battling for some minutes. Sam Hauser, I think, is going to have a big year. He's one of the guys that I think is going to have a big year here. So we'll see kind of what goes there. RJ Lewis is an interesting case. He was undrafted. He's on a two-way contract, was on a two-way contract with the Utah Jazz up until about an hour ago. And he had a great, collegiate career, was awesome at St. John's. Everybody knows, I don't actually watch a lot of college basketball. I've told you guys this, but this is one of those college stories that even I didn't miss, where he was benched in his final game of the round of 32. I think he was like 3 of 17 from the field, didn't play down the stretch with Rick Pitino. And so there was a lot of discourse around that. And did that make it so that he did not get drafted? Why was he benched? All of those things. So he had a little bit of a tough exit from college basketball, but ultimately was a very talented player. I've seen already a lot of questions online, and people have DM'd me about what this means for Amari Williams, because as it currently stands, the Celtics have two-way players under contract in Max Shulga and Miles Norris. Max Shulga was their 57th pick. He officially signed that contract last week. He is like a guard who, you guys saw him in Summer League, but he wasn't super flashy, but I think that he's a very reliable, kind of steady player. And then Miles Norris returns from a contract last season. So those are the two players for now. RJ Lewis would be the third. But my understanding is that Amari Williams is still somebody that they view as part of their young core, young guys that they just drafted. And so I actually do think that he's likely going to sign a two-way. I don't know exactly how it's going to go. Does one of the other guys that has a two-way contract lose it? Does RJ Lewis potentially lose his contract? There's now 4 guys that are ultimately slotted for these 3 two-way contracts. So we'll see exactly what goes down. But I don't necessarily view this as anything definitive for Amari Williams. So for the big Amari Williams fans that we have here, I know Nick NBA is one. I don't know if he's here on this stream, but I know that he was pretty high on him from the jump. That's a player that I still think is going to be with the Celtics. Then again, when you're drafted late in the second round, both of those guys are, it's not much of a commitment long-term. They, drafted Anton Watson last year, signed him to a two-way, but then when a better player, a player that they viewed as a better player came along and Miles Norris, they signed that player and were able to waive him, and he's with New York now. So I don't think they're uber committed to any of these guys. If anything kind of has to change. So RJ Lewis, to me, he's intriguing. He can score the ball. That's his skill set. I always have a little bit of bias towards guys that have actually been good at a high level. So this is the classic conundrum with NBA drafting, where you have guys like Hugo Gonzalez, who has a high ceiling and, potential. And there's reasons why he was slotted to be a first-round pick, but he hasn't actually been really good at any professional level because he's 19 years old and barely played in Real Madrid. And then you got guys like RJ Lewis, who has, scored a lot of points in college basketball, but is, a little bit on the older side. There's concerns of people don't know what the ceiling is going to be. So it's the two prototypes of, NBA draft prospects. And I think you want to have a mix of those players. And now they have a little bit of a mix there. So I would imagine he's at training camp and he's battling for a two-way for a roster spot, but I don't think the two-way is going to be automatically his the way that you might expect. So we'll see exactly what happens there. The other thing that I just wanted to mention is that I do think the team's going to leave that 15th roster spot open heading into the season. That has been the norm in the past. They typically like to have a little bit of flexibility. They like to have a little bit of freedom there, and there's certain roster needs or injuries, knock on wood, they're able to sign an additional player to that 15th spot. Also, to give us them more financial flexibility right now as well. So none of the moves that happened today change my mindset on any of that. Somebody here was asking a little bit ago what I project the starting lineup to be next season, and this is kind of a fun game. One thing about me, I don't really like making a lot of predictions. I don't do the whole trade machine stuff because I think that it's kind of a waste. I don't really like projecting where are the Celtics going to be in the Eastern Conference next season. It is a part of the job, so I have to do it sometimes, but it feels like just guessing. We're all guessing, and even the best analysts in the world, I think Brian Windhorst is a guy who's super plugged in. He's generally not very sensationalist. He's pretty accurate with his reporting, and he's talked a lot about this. You can't make that many predictions accurately, because at the end of the day, that's kind of the whole fun of basketball. That being said, I will kind of project the starting lineup based on how things are shaping up here. I think it's going to be Peyton Pritchard and Derek White in the backcourt. And then I think we're going to see Neemias Queta still starting at center, even though Chris Boucher now gives me a little bit of pause around, is he going to potentially battle for some of those minutes? He has been a bench player for most of his career. 2021, he started 14 games. 2022, he started 9 games. But for the most part, he has been a bench player. So I think we're going to see Pritchard and Derek in the backcourt. I think we're going to see Simons as their designated sixth man, and he's going to come in and score in bunches. And he might end up scoring one of the top 3 players on the team. So as far as scoring goes, so we'll see. Just because somebody's coming off the bench doesn't necessarily mean that that's putting them in a low scoring position. But I think it's going to be Derek and Peyton. I think Jaylen Brown, obviously, is, not no brainer starting there. And then Kata is the 5. That gives you one more spot. Am I missing somebody obvious? I'm trying to think. I mean, Sam Hauser, this might be an opportunity for Sam Hauser to be a more high volume shooter, because I saw today a stat that shows that he has the fastest closeouts of any player in the NBA. Like, teams close out on him so fast. And if just that alone is an asset if you're on the floor. So that's a little bit of a small ball lineup. Because I don't know that Hauser can play the 4. Maybe you have Boucher and Kata. This is tough. I should have probably figured out my starting 5 before I started talking. Normally I figure this out on the cuff. I don't know. What do you guys think? You guys can put in the chat which 5 players you could see being the team's initial starting lineup. And I think right now there's going to be at least a couple of different versions of a starting lineup, and they're probably going to shake it around a little bit. Jaylen Brown, it's time to become a small ball 4. I mean, that's kind of the thing. Like, you have a little bit of a tough line. Tatum usually has made these lineups so easily because he can play any position. Maybe Jaylen plays a little bit of the 4, but I think you're probably going to have maybe Boucher and Kata, and then you have Hauser and Simons both coming off the bench. I gotta workshop this, guys. I thought it was going to be intuitive now that these moves have happened, but it actually provided no clarity for me. I still think, though, Pritchard and Derek and Jaylen and Kata are the 4 guys that I'm most confident with. But hey, Boucher's pretty proven, so maybe he's going to be in that mix as well. We'll see. But feel free to drop any other questions if you might have any other questions about these moves, about the offseason, kind of where we go from here. Michaela with a question. If I call OKC, are they going to give us SGA for Pritchard, since you think he can start on any team? If not, respectfully, why do we keep overrating the guy? I didn't know. I didn't realize I was picking such an antagonistic question. No, Michaela, I think first of all, I don't know that he can start on any team. Obviously, it depends on the team that you have and whether he makes sense to start on every team, right? But I think on this Celtics roster, again, you have to look at the stuff not in a vacuum. It's not just about whether the player is really talented or whether, who's the best available scorer, but he is under contract for multiple seasons. So they are viewing him as a part of their future because he's on a really good contract. I don't think they're going to be able to have Simons on this roster when Tatum gets back, because this year he commanded $28 million. So in that case, if you think you're not going to be able to have Simons on the roster in 2 years, is there a point in playing him as your starter and having Pritchard coming off the bench? You could argue yes, because if he scores a lot and he shows you has high value, you can trade him at the deadline for some real value. I get that. I just think that as they look at their roster construction moving forward, they want him to be a starter. That's the goal. Maybe it won't work out. Maybe him and White are too small of a backcourt. They have defensive weaknesses. We'll see. But I think they're going to at least try that combination, because that is who they have under contract in the long term. And if that's a good duo, you're solving a big question that came with Drew Holiday's contract being offloaded. So yeah, so that's kind of my thought on that. Again, if you have a team that has 2 all-star guards, like the Celtics kind of did with Drew Holiday and Derek White, Pritchard would come off the bench in a lot of those situations. But I think that right now, where he's at as a player on both ends is good enough to be a starter on most teams. Question here about Horford. Is Horford coming back? He is. Everything I've heard is that that door is pretty much shut, so I would be very surprised. I've seen some questions about Xavier Tillman. Xavier Tillman was pretty limited last year. I think that the knee injury that he suffered, he had offseason knee surgery after the championship. He also lost his father that spring, and I think that he took a little bit of time away. He's talked about that. So he had a tough offseason last year, was not completely healthy, and we'll see if he's healthier now and whether he's able to be more of that earlier version of himself. So that's, an open question. I'm not putting a ton on Xavier Tillman just because at the end of the day, he did not show us much when he was on the floor last year. I really like him as a person. He's been one of my favorite Celtics to cover. Really, really nice guy. Obviously had that legendary NBA Finals 3-point shot, which is enough to cement his legacy here. But I just don't know how mobile he's going to be. So if he comes back and looks a lot healthier and is moving better, that to me would be an indicator that okay, he was actually really hurt last year and now he's more healthy. So yeah, that is that. trying to see if there are any other questions here. Do you think that Simons actually stays, or they try to get under the first apron entirely? This is not reporting. This is just my gut instinct. I think Anthony Simons is not somebody, and like I said this a couple times in the show, I don't think that he's going to be here long term, just because of, if you look at their contract and who they have available and what he's commanded, unless he takes like a big pay cut, that's not the indication that I get. So if they can find a good deal for him between now and training camp, which with every day that passes, that becomes increasingly less likely, then I think he would be a great candidate for an in-season trade before the deadline. So right now, and I've changed my mind on this, so you can go back and say, hey, you said something different a month ago. I did. When he first was acquired, I thought that he would be reshuffled pretty quickly. I actually thought that he would be reshuffled before the trade would even be made official. And so I didn't think he was ever going to officially be a Celtic. But now that he's been one for about a month, July 6th was when these transactions became official, I'm leaning towards him being on the roster to start the season. And I'm leaning towards there being some sort of in-season trade where they, can continue to reduce their payroll ahead of the deadline, the trade deadline in February. So I think we will see him as a Celtic. We'll see him score some baskets, probably have some big games. But I still would guess that he's not going to finish the season in Boston. That could obviously change if they still don't find any suitors for him. But I think it's one of those things where if he plays well in Boston, that can raise his value a little bit as well. But it's all speculation, because honestly, I thought he was going to be traded by now, and he's still here. So, okay. Continuing to just scroll here. I like all the discussion. I'm just trying to see if there's any questions that I need to answer. Last thing I'll say is I have a couple stories coming out. You can check that out. Celtics blog. If you are a Celtics blog reader, sorry, our site has been down today. We're doing a transition, so sorry about that. But I have a story coming out tomorrow about Jaylen Brown and chess, something that I've been working on behind the scenes, and went to watch a chess academy, which was pretty cool. And then just check out all of our content on CLNS Media right now. Yes, it is the dead of the offseason, but we still have new stuff coming out all the time. Bobby and I had Gary Washburn of the Boston Globe yesterday to discuss the Connecticut Sun potentially moving to Boston. That's something that I'm really excited about. There's some potentially challenges there, but Boston has long, I think, deserved a WNBA team, and that may come to fruition. So we had Gary on for a really in-depth discussion about that. If you're wondering, like, what is this whole WNBA to Boston thing, that is the best place to find more information. Gary literally broke the news, so he is the expert on the issue. And I cover the WNBA. I'm a WNBA voter. I don't know if you guys know that, because I know most of you follow me for my Celtics content. But I do get to vote for media awards and things like that. So we did an episode on that. We have a lot of stuff coming up. On Thursday, Jason Tatum and Joe Mazzulla are going to be in Providence for an unveiling of an early childhood education center. They're not addressing the media, but they will be talking, and we'll have some content coming out of that, so you can follow along on CLNS, All Access, CLNS Media, as always. Subscribe to my podcast, the You Got Boston podcast, on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify. Subscribe to CLNS Media. Thank you, as always, for watching. This was just a live reaction show. I was just sitting on my couch, brainstorming longer form content and planning my Georges Niang feature, actually, which was unfortunately halted before I even got to start. So thanks all for joining. This has been a lot of fun. Feel free to turn on notifications, because we will continue to go live as any news breaks in the coming weeks. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I will be back with more content soon.